Horror games in the video game industry are a really strange concept, almost archaic in a sense. Now, let me backtrack a little bit. There was a time where people could get legitimately hyped when a new horror game was announced. Thanks to the release of Silent Hill in 1999, along with the rise of the legendary director Hideo Kojima thanks to his later involvement with PT, horror in video games got the jumpstart it needed. Resident Evil in 1996 definitely kickstarted a genre, but Silent Hill was something of a revelation, no pun intended, to game developers. Resident Evil established the now famous survival horror genre, where you must meticulously and carefully keep track of your ammo and health. Silent Hill is similar in a sense, but the series later became shrouded in a deep mystery, with bizarre themes and a lesser focus on combat, with the two series almost opposing each other in a sense, with Resident Evil embracing an action horror genre and Silent Hill coming to take a more psychological direction. And with the unique direction of the now cancelled Silent Hills, the ever-famed PT demo threw the internet into an uncontrollable frenzy with how good it was. If Metal Gear Solid solidified Kojima, no pun intended again, PT cemented his legacy. PT unleashed a tidal wave of psychological horror games that aimed to replicate the everlasting house that lasts forever, along with the immense terror of the game. PT was such a massive success because Guillermo del Toro, a film director who has worked on countless horror movies, worked on the game, and PT became known for its incredibly uniquely dense atmosphere that honestly only a seasoned film director, along with the mastermind Hideo Kojima, together could create. And PT created certainly a type of horror that no one had ever seen before. Now, let's talk about Outlast. Outlast was developed in one of the heydays of horror in video games, before the trash Steam asset flips began to take over. I won't say they weren't there before then, but they were definitely there after that, and they were there during that time as well. Developed by Red Barrel Studio, Outlast released out of quite nowhere and took the internet by storm, with countless famed YouTubers launching lifetime careers thanks to their long plays of the game. The game has some of the most classic moments in any video game that has horror in its name, with terrifying jump scares and a deeply rooted, tension-filled atmosphere that very few games can claim to have. Outlast follows Miles Upshur and his unfortunate discovery of Mount Massive Asylum, where he quickly discovers that the asylum's attendants are not quite normal. Outlast was debatably one of the first games to popularize the usage of the first-person perspective in horror games. Despite being developed as recently as 2013, the horror genre in video games is still in a very, very early state, and unfortunately, it also remains in a very stagnant state, with now Outlast and Resident Evil being the only real contenders in a larger scope, considering the popularity and the development, the monetary development money that the studios have. But with smaller development teams like the Bloober team and Puppet Combo taking the indie scene by storm, with respective games such as Observer and Night Ripper, there's a lot of hope left, and there's a lot of content left to be seen, and the horror genre could be in another revival scene. We'll only see that with time. For now, let's keep talking about Outlast. Outlast was a viral sensation, and quickly received a DLC which was, in my opinion, just as good if not better than the base game. Outlast Whistleblower serves as a prequel to Outlast, following the events surrounding Wayland Park, a simple engineer who works at Mount Massive Asylum. Together, Outlast and its DLC Whistleblower serve up one absolute masterpiece of a story, Miles Upshur being a really great protagonist, and Wayland Park's prequel story proving to be one of the most terrifying things that has been created, and it also has a terrifying antagonist that does horrible, horrible things. Whistleblower has been pointed out for its incredibly gruesome moments, with one very famous moment that caused every YouTuber to have to put up black bars. If you know the part I'm talking about, then you know the part I'm talking about. The devs of Outlast have pointed to the famed Amnesia: The Dark Descent as the primary inspiration for their own masterpiece. Red Barrel's implemented a system that is very familiar to us now in hindsight. In Outlast and in Amnesia, you have no weapons, only your raw wits. In Outlast, you happen to have a camera that can record events and turn on night vision. The night vision mechanic is excellently implemented in Outlast, with moment after moment contact with terrifying antagonists, adding up to a tense survival psychological horror game. It's a game that is rooted in the survival horror genre, but takes away the ammo and the health. It doesn't take away the health, it takes away the ammo, and it takes away the guns, and it takes away the melee, and it takes away the zombies. And Outlast adds a cast of asylum patients to terrify you even more. Thanks to the usage of Unreal Engine 3 when Outlast was released in 2013, the game is in a beautifully gruesome high definition. Enemies have terrifyingly textured faces, while other enemies may not have faces, and some enemies may not even have heads to begin with. Red Barrels clearly had an idea with Outlast. The quick, snappy 10-hour campaign takes Miles Upshur on a journey that is undeniably horrifying and equally unforgettable. The story has some also very interesting commentaries on the modern mental hospital etiquette. Countless times you will find roaches, bugs, urine-stained floors, and buckets with fecal matter in them, suggesting that Mount Massive Asylum may actually represent some of the older mental health institutions which treated their patients poorly. An Outlast story actually complements this possibility, with the patients being clearly oppressed by the asylum's higher-ups, with a strange hierarchy of even the patients, with hierarchies ranking from doctors who are actually patients all the way down to lowlifes that are in suits that cannot be shed from themselves. Outlast's story is so incredibly relatable because of these patients, and they are mentally unable to rebel, and therefore are these horrifying creatures that unwittingly, some of them wittingly, obey a higher force known as the Wall Rider. The story ends in a shocking cliffhanger akin to the ending of Shadow of the Colossus. If you haven't played either, I'll leave it to you to play Outlast. The game has been out for 6 years. You need to play Outlast. It is a fantastic game. I strongly recommend it. Which brings me to the main point of this video essay. Outlast's immense impact on the horror genre is undeniable. By itself, the base game's campaign introduces us to a horrifying new world to immerse ourselves in. The lore behind Mount Massive is immense, with documents from the perspective of patients and doctors' reports providing a real interest and a real intrigue to Mount Massive Asylum and the further world that Outlast is set in. Many of the doctors' reports are actually intended to be foreshadowing, as many of them actually talk about patients you will later encounter either as an enemy or as an NPC that will probably get killed by another worse enemy. A story mechanic of this caliber is something I don't think is used nearly enough in horror games, and I think it should be used a lot more, because the foreshadowing does make it a lot more terrifying, and you're always wondering what'll happen, what the character will be like, and what you'll experience when you encounter this terrifying enemy. It can be said that Outlast and Amnesia: The Dark Descent effectively created the psychological horror genre in video games, what Fortnite players will call a walking simulator horror game. In fact, these people cannot be farther from the truth. Sometimes they're correct. Sometimes they're correct. But most of the time, it depends on if an asset flipper is making a game. And remember, Fortnite is just an asset flip of the Unreal Dev Kit. But we're neither here nor there. Outlast is a richly detailed and terrifying game with tons of gameplay value. There are stealth horror segments, famed chase sequence, one of which I myself had particular fun with when me, myself, and my brother played the game, and the surprisingly well-developed character of Miles Upshore. Now let's look at that fun scene with the doctor. I forgot his name, but he's a doctor, and he has a giant pair of scissors.
Hurry. To the right.
Don't close the bathroom door. Don't close the bathroom door. Maybe you won't go in there. Or I mean, maybe.
Little backstabbing butthole. Your family's next.
I don't know if he has a family.
Did he even chase me?
Did he already pass? X.
You die.
Slice of dice, James. Wow.
He just stood there.
Waited. Don't close the door. He probably knows you're there.
He knows I'm still there.
Great observation.
Don't go that way.
Back up in the locker.
What?
Back up in the locker.
What are you talking about?
Buddy.
Dummy. Hey, buddy!
Hey,
I know you're in
Cat.
that locker.
Hey, Poogie Cat.
Outlast's first-person perspective was an immense success, and, as expected, seeped into other games. Most notably, Outlast was due for a sequel, and in 2017, Outlast 2 was released after much anticipation. The demo of the game was actually really good, but it turns out that's just about all the game was. And it turns out 2017 was actually the start of demos being all the game is. Anthem. Outlast 2 is essentially a glorified chase segment simulator, taking the chase segments from Outlast and really just only using those, and really just making a 12-hour game with 11 hours of chase sequences and 1 hour where they kill the only interesting character that you never actually get to interact with. Imagine that. The game essentially has no other gameplay features aside from this really bad scene in this swampy area that Sammy had a ton of fun with, and he can confirm that.
So freaking funny. Actually.
Do you need to make water, Nick? Y'all hear the voice?
What?
Sounds weird.
What? Oh my.
Let's go.
Let's go. That was the weirdest step
Wow.
ever. He just went like,
Threw me up to punch me.
I can tell if you feel bad. Underwater. Go in the water. Go in the water. Underwater.
Underwater won't help. As soon as I peek my head up, it'll kill me anyway.
Try running past them one more time. I don't think there's no.
I can't run past them.
What?
When I peek my head up, they shoot me.
Stop.
Shut the fuck up.
Crawl. Crawl. Just stay there. Wow. Shut up, you did it too. Not that way.
don't see anyone fornicating.
That's not exactly what it is. Looking here.
Outlast actually ended up being the inspiring creation of two of the best horror games this generation. Frictional Games, the geniuses behind Amnesia: The Dark Descent and other Amnesia games that nobody remembers. They took a 5-year break between The Dark Descent, the only game that people remember from them, and in 2015 released another game that people will undeniably remember them for, which I believe to be their seminal, indisputable, undeniable, incredible masterpiece, Soma. Soma is a paralyzingly terrifying video game, with some of the best audio design in a video game and using a new engine that they made great use of. Soma is set in a uniquely underwater setting, and it proved to be yet another revival of the psychological horror genre. And with Frictional Games now being 10 years old, it proves that this studio still is the best in the horror game space, and I will stand by that. We need Soma 2. Frictional Games, where are you? Frictional, where are you? We need you. We need you so badly, Frictional. Please come back. Soma's enemies are undeniably inspired by Outlast, with a variation of robotic enemies and even some robotic fleshy enemies, and some enemies that just straight up are not even there. They're just in these machines. I'm not gonna spoil anything. If you have not played Soma, just stop listening to this video, play Soma. It's 9 hours, so play Soma for 9 hours straight, and then come back to this video. Leave the video up, because if you leave the video, YouTube's algorithm won't punch me in the mouth. So you can play the 9-hour campaign. But anyways, Soma's overall commentary on what it means to be human makes it one of the most poignant and moving stories in a horror game. Soma remains to be my favorite horror game ever, and sits at my number 3 favorite video games of all time. It is literally my number 3 spot of any video game I've played ever. It is so good. The other game that Outlast unquestionably directly influenced was the unique one-in-a-kind cyberpunk horror game Observer. Even though Bloober Team is best known for their Layers of Fear series, within containing 3 games, it is a tragedy to me that no one seems to remember that they crafted Observer. Not only is the horror cyberpunk genre a genre that is basically never used, Observer has a completely unique aesthetic that I can only closely associate to what you will see in April 2020 when Cyberpunk 2077 releases. And honestly, Observer was released in 2017, and I've never seen a game quite like it, and I can only say that the closest thing you'll get to it is probably Cyberpunk 2077. Observer follows the story of Daniel Lazarski and his search for his son amidst a larger problem of this technological virus. There's a much deeper story there, and of course, I won't spoil it again if you haven't played it. If you haven't played Observer, this is my charge to you. Play Observer. So you can play Soma's 9-hour campaign, play Observer's 8-hour campaign, so that's, 17 hours? So you can just take a 17-hour break from this video and then come back to the video. I try to be funny, it fails. It fails so badly sometimes. Anyways, Bloober, please, just make another Observer. It's not that hard, right? Just make another Observer. It can't be. No, take your time. I know you just made Blair Witch and it's a walking simulator, so you Fortnite players are right that time, but, just one trip up is okay, okay? The stealth segments, the unique moments where you never know if you're talking to a human or an android, almost makes this chain link effect of inspiration. Outlast inspired Soma. Soma clearly inspired Observer, to my knowledge, so on and so forth. These 3 games, especially Outlast, cannot be overstated in their importance. Even though all three may have just been blips on an oversaturated horror genre, there's a reason why I remember all three of them so dearly, and there's a reason why Outlast particularly is so revered among horror fans and gamers who know for a fact that horror in video games is slowly creeping to a halt, and who knows what the horror genre will look like in the future with Konami doing crap all and turning Silent Hill into a slot machine and all that fun stuff. It's the honest truth that Red Barrel's quite literally knocked it out of the park with Outlast. And with a recent cryptic tweet all but implying Outlast 3 is coming, probably in 2020, I figured now was a great time to revisit and put to rest my thoughts on why Outlast is so freaking amazing. Outlast 2 was a horrible, trash-ridden chase sequence, non-interesting, no character development game, but I still have high hopes for Outlast 3, or whatever this next Outlast game is from Red Barrels. Thank you all for watching and listening to me ramble about Outlast. I love Outlast, I love the game, I love Red Barrels, they do great stuff. Please let Outlast 3 be good, and we can rest. And also Resident Evil 8. Where is it? What are you doing, Capcom? Why isn't Resident Evil 8 out yet? Capcom, what are you doing? Why isn't Resident Evil 8 out? Why? Why aren't you doing it? Why isn't it out? I just don't get it. Can someone tell me why Resident Evil 8 isn't out yet? Why they haven't even announced it? What is this Project Resistance? I thought it looked good, but this is like mobile-looking game? Where's Resident Evil 8? Can someone tell me that? Good grief. Observation was pretty good, though. That was a good game. I don't even know who made that, and it's actually a pretty good game. Where's Resident Evil 8?